Hi, I'm Jack, an engineer on the UI Frameworks team. In this video, I'd like to share with you some of the new drag-and-drop APIs available in the 2027 releases. Since iOS 16, SwiftUI has provided drag-and-drop through the draggable and drop destination modifiers. The draggable modifier allows people to move content, like photos and text, throughout the system by using a drag gesture. You can conform your data to the Transferable protocol, giving it a transfer representation that allows it to be dragged through the system and accepted by other apps. For example, I can conform my card type to Transferable, and then pass an instance of it to the draggable modifier. The drop destination modifier allows your app and views to accept all kinds of content. You decide what data your view can handle by specifying a transferable type to accept. If I want my view to accept card instances, for example, I can provide the card type to the drop destination modifier. For more information about how to make your content transferable, I'd recommend watching the video Meet Transferable from WWDC 2022. SwiftUI has expanded the capabilities of drag and drop in 3 major ways. There's a new reordering API that allows people to rearrange content using drag and drop. You can enable people to drag multiple items at a time using the drag container APIs. And you can now configure how data is transferred in drags and at drop destinations. I'll be implementing the drag and drop interactions for a game of Solitaire. The game will look similar to how I've arranged these playing cards. I can move cards between the piles, and I can pull a card from the deck of the remaining cards. You don't need to be familiar with Solitaire to understand the API I'll be using. And if you'd like to follow along, you can download the sample project. It contains the views and game logic needed to get started. I'll start by adopting the new Reordering API in my app. Just like the cards in my Solitaire game, your app's content likely exists in some order. But people might want to change that order to organize their content in the way that works best for them. When I make the cards in the Solitaire game reorderable, I'll be able to drag them individually. When I drag a view, it'll be lifted from its position in the view hierarchy, and an empty placeholder will take its spot. From there, I can drag this card throughout my app. As I move the card over other cards, they make space for me to drop the one that I'm dragging. The placeholder updates to reflect where the dragged card will go once I drop it. And when I drop the card, it will be moved to its new position. I'll add this capability to my Solitaire game. I'll first implement reordering without the game rules in place. Then, once everything's working, I'll refine the implementation to include the rules. I've opened the Xcode project for this app. Its contents are split into 2 main folders, Game and Views. The Game folder contains the Swift data models and code for updating them. I'm going to be spending most of my time in the Views folder, where the SwiftUI is. I'll open the Game view, which contains the layout and views of the playing area. But before I add reordering to my app, I'm going to test it out in a preview. At the bottom of this file, I have one that shows 4 cards on a green background. To enable reordering, I add the reorderable modifier to the for each that creates the cards. Then, I put a reorder container modifier on the H stack. I specify that the item type of the container is card value, which matches the type used in my for each view. In the closure, I'm provided a difference at the end of an operation, and I handle it by updating my cards array. Now, I can interact with the preview and reorder cards. I can drag the ace of clubs from the left and drop it at the end. In Solitaire, my goal is to organize cards by moving them between the piles. So in my app, I want all of the piles to be in the same reorder container. I can accomplish this by adding the reorder container modifier to the H stack that contains the piles. I provide the same card value type for the container's item type. Because there are multiple piles, I need a way to uniquely refer to each of them. I use the card group type to identify each pile, and In the closure, I handle a difference across multiple piles. Lastly, I need to go to Pile View and add the reorderable modifier. Because I have multiple reorderable modifiers in the same container, I need to provide a unique identifier for each one. Now, I can drag the 4 of diamonds and drop it onto the pile with the 5 of spades. This is great, but there's one more refinement I'd like to make right now. In Solitaire, you can't reorder the face-down cards. But right now, I'm able to lift one from a pile. This is because I made the entire array of cards in Pile View reorderable. While I could use some advanced drag-and-drop API to control this, there's an even easier way to solve this. I can add a second for each view without the reorderable modifier and slice the cards array between the two. The first for each view will contain all of the face-down cards. The second, with the reorderable modifier, contains all of the face-up cards. And with this change, I can still reorder the face-up cards, but when I drag on a face-down card, nothing happens. Now I have the basic interactions of Solitaire in play. Because of the reorderable modifier, I can now drag individual cards around to reorder them. The reorder container modifier allowed me to scope reordering to include all of the piles. And by moving the face-down cards into a separate for each, I was able to keep them from being reordered. These APIs are newly available on all Apple platforms that support drag and drop. But my Solitaire game is still missing a critical part of the gameplay, being able to move multiple cards at once. In Solitaire, when I drag a card in the middle of a pile, it brings the cards stacked on it. But in your app, the interaction model might not be as straightforward. One way to handle this is to add selection to your draggable items. In this example, I'll use a simple tap to select interaction model. As I tap each card, it's added to the selection. Once I perform a drag gesture on one of the selected cards, all 3 cards lift together. I'll add the ability to drag multiple cards at once to my Solitaire game. I'll open back up to Game View, where I added the reorder container modifier. Reorder containers implicitly provide their own drag container and drop destination capabilities, but I can add my own to customize this behavior. I declare the drag container modifier below the reorder container modifier. For them to work together, I need to make sure that they use the same type, card value. In the closure, I'm given an item identifier, and I need to provide transferable data for the items that I want to move. I call out to my game logic to find the cards stacked above the one I'm trying to drag. When I drag this 4 of clubs, which is below a 3 of diamonds, I now get both cards in the same drag. When I drag the stack of cards together, they collapsed into a pile, with the first card on top. This is the default preview, but I can configure it to several options, including pile, list, and stack. I can configure this with the drag previews formation modifier. I choose stack because it's compact and has the feel of stacked cards. When I drag the 4 of clubs now, the cards form into a neat stack. But when I drag over the piles, they revert back to the default appearance. Because they are above my reorder container's drop destination, they're using its drop formation. To configure that, I can use the drop previews formation modifier. Because I want this to be consistent across all drop destinations in my app, I declare this modifier on the root layout of my game view. Now, the cards I drag maintain the same appearance throughout the playing area. I made it possible to drag multiple cards at a time in my Solitaire game. I used the drag container API to make it possible to lift more than one at a time. I added drag previews formation to customize the appearance of the lifted cards, and I ensured a consistent appearance by setting the same value for drop previews formation. The drag container modifier is newly available on iOS, iPadOS, and visionOS 27. All 3 modifiers are available on macOS 26 and newer. To implement the remaining parts of the game, I'll use the new drag configuration API. When adding a drag capability to my card view, I should think about how I want that card's value to move. In my Solitaire game, I'll be dragging new cards into the piles. And by default, SwiftUI will suggest that the data moves by copy. This works well when you're moving data between apps or inserting something new. But in my card game, dragging a card should not create a copy at the destination. Instead, I'd like the card to be moved from the deck into the piles. Unlike my reorder container, which is designed to handle moves, these views are a separate drag source and drop destination. I'll need to use the new drag configuration API to achieve this. I'll add the ability for cards to be moved into the piles without duplication by using the drag configuration API. In the app, I have the deck of remaining cards on the top left of the playing area. I want to be able to drag this 6 of diamonds onto the pile with the 7 of spades. To get started, I open Xcode to Remainder View, which contains the views for this part of the game. The current face-up card already has its own drag modifiers. By default, this view will transfer the value by copy. I add the drag configuration modifier to this view and specify that my intent is for this card to be transferred by move. But it's the drop destination that decides how the data is transferred. In this case, my drop destination is the reorder container in game view. By default, the reorder container only accepts moves within the container. If I want to accept new items, I have to provide my own drop destination modifier. I add one below the drag container, and I specify that I want to accept the same card type. I read the reorder container's destination value for the inserted items, and if it exists, I call into game logic to insert the new cards at the destination. Moves between piles are still handled by the closure on the reorder container modifier. And with the drop destination in place, I can now configure how it receives items. I add the drop configuration modifier, which has the final say about how the data is transferred. I'm provided session information in the closure, and I can use that to return a drop configuration that tells the drop destination how to accept the card. I do 3 things in this closure. First, I determine which pile should receive the cards by checking where the drag is. I create a destination value with that pile's identifier to tell SwiftUI where the cards should go. Second, I express my intent to only support move-based transfers. Normally, you'd want to support copying as a fallback when move isn't available, but in a card game, copying doesn't make sense. And third, I validate that this destination value is allowed within the rules of the game. If I return a forbidden operation, SwiftUI will prevent the drop destination from receiving the cards. With all of those changes, now I'm ready to drag a card into play. I could drag this 6 of diamonds from the remainder deck onto the pile with the 7 of spades, but only because the rules allow me to. And when I do, the 6 of diamonds is moved from the remainders deck into the pile. If I try to drop this queen of diamonds on the pile that has the 7 of diamonds, the queen will return to the remainder deck because the move is not valid. I was able to drag cards into piles using the new configuration modifiers. I started by adding a drag configuration on my source card, where I specified my intent to transfer the card by move. Then, I used drop destination to enable the reorder container to accept new cards. And I applied drop configuration to that destination so that it would take cards by move when the play was allowed. I started building this app with only a reorderable and reorder container modifier. But I was able to fully customize reordering by composing drag and drop modifiers on top of them. Now, I have a fully complete game of Solitaire. Even if you're not building Solitaire, you can use these APIs to make your apps better. Consider giving people the ability to reorder the content in your app. Remember that you can also give them the ability to drag multiple items at a time with the drag container API. and fine-tuning your app with drag and drop configurations will make it a delight to use. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get back to work. Thanks for watching.